You're welcome to today's episode of the Tech Talk with me, Kazeem. And today on the Tech Talk, we're going to be talking getting started with CLI for Microsoft 365. And as you can see, I'm not alone, as usual, on the show. So today, I've got Garry Trinder on the show. Hi, Gary, and welcome to the Tech Talk show.
Hi, Kazeem. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for inviting me on.
So let's kick things off with an introduction now. So can you please tell my audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. Like Kazeem said, my name's Garry Trinder. I'm based in the UK. I work for Microsoft as a modern work consultant. So I've been in Microsoft 365, SharePoint kind of world for the last decade. This has been a huge part of my life. I recently joined Microsoft. Before I joined Microsoft back in August of last year, I was actually a Microsoft MVP for Office development as well. And as part of being an MVP, a lot of my time was spent with the CLI for Microsoft 365 tool. So I spent a lot of time working with the community and other MVPs as well to build out the tool which we're going to talk about today.
And by the way, I like your shirt, the wood you're putting on.
See, it's all about branding. You see, awareness.
All right, Gary. So usually I don't like us to assume on the show because there might be some people consuming this now that are students, right? Or some newbies consuming this. So I'd like us to start with definition, right? So let's start with defining what the CLI is. So let's start from there. What is the CLI?
So the CLI, so it's a command line interface. So it's a tool that you can use from your terminal. So from maybe a command prompt or PowerShell window, and the tool basically provides you with several commands that allow you to execute requests against Microsoft 365. So authenticate against a Microsoft 365 tenant and then be able to execute commands against different services in 365. So things like SharePoint, things like Power Apps and Azure Active Directory. So it kind of hopefully make this simple that you can just use one tool, authenticate, and then configure your tenant. So let's say you want to, add a user to a tenant. We've got a command for that. You want to create a SharePoint site. We've got a command for that. You can just fill in the different options, execute the request, and we do all the hard work for you.
When it comes to Microsoft 365, almost everybody manages things through the portal, or should I say, an average administrator would prefer to work with the portal. But now we're talking CLI, and CLI is also something that is supported with Microsoft 365. So I want to ask, why the CLI for Microsoft 365? What's the goal of it when the portal works just fine?
Yeah, so like definitely people use the portal and you can click around and create things and that's fine when you're getting used to the platform. But when you want to kind of bring in levels of automation, you want to bring in some standardization. So you just want to have a script that you can just execute. You don't have to go through 10, 20 screens to create something when you can just run a single command and everything is created for you. So it's that kind of helping you be more efficient as well with managing your tenant and all the different services there. So once you have a use case of a command, let's say for example you want to add hundreds of new users to your tenant, you could just have a script that you put into a loop, just run that one command, pass in different parameters, and there you go. You've got something that is easily repeatable, and it's a lot easier to manage than going through lots of screens over and over again, and kind of those laborious tasks that we certainly don't love when we're managing systems. Anything that's going to make our lives easier, that's where the CLI comes in. That's what we're trying to help here.
So talking automation now, so if I have a script, a CLI script prepared, can I use this script within PowerShell or Bash shell, for those using, for instance, the Linux operating system? Does it really matter what operating system you're on? Or do you have to be on Windows, or can you use it across operating system platforms?
No, so one of our key goals is to enable you to use any shell that you want, any operating system that you want. Originally, the CLI was born due to that problem. So back in the days when SharePoint framework developers were moving into this new world of using open source tooling, Node.js, and other operating systems, because we could run Node.js on Mac and on Linux. What we found was people who were working on those operating systems, the only option they had to manage their Microsoft 365 tenants was to run PowerShell. And at that time, PowerShell wasn't cross-platform. You had to run a virtual machine on your Mac to just run Windows to execute a command. So one of the first key goals for the CLI was to enable you to have a tool that you could run on Windows or on Mac or on Linux. So that is a key I guess design feature that we have, because we use Node.js as the platform. That's our dependency that we run on top of. Node.js runs on any operating system, any shell, so Bash or PowerShell. You can just execute the Microsoft 365 CLI for Microsoft 365 commands on either, and you're able to use them. So combining CLI commands and PowerShell as well is a really powerful way to use the CLI. But we're very conscious the cloud is an open platform. We know that people who've been using Linux and prefer Linux and who have skills in Bash scripting, we kind of think that it's slightly unfair that, because you're now using Microsoft 365, you're going to have to learn PowerShell. We don't think that's necessarily the best way. We want you to be able to bring the skills that you've got to the platform, and if you want to use Bash still, then CLI is an option for you, just to help with your requests to the platform.
I'm sure some people would be looking forward to some kind of demo you probably can show us about the CLI, right? So is there something you have for us, a quick demo that you can show us about some of the cool stuff that we can do with CLI on Microsoft 365?
Certainly, yes. So what I can do is I can show you a bit of an example. We'll go from kind of zero to connecting to an environment and having a play around, and can show you how the commands work, and a couple of scenarios that you might want to look into and think, yeah, next time, rather than clicking around in the portal, I might use the CLI for my purpose, and have a look into it at least. Like I mentioned, so the CLI is cross-platform. We use Node.js. We are published in NPM, Node Package Manager. So we are under the alias of @PMP CLI Microsoft 365. So if you look us up on NPM, you can see the documentation that we've got. So we have kind of some of the features that we call out. So like say, run on any operating system, any shell, you have a single login. So we don't expect you to have to log into all these different services. Once you've logged into 365, we do all the switching in the background. So if you want to run a command against SharePoint or against Teams, or any of those other services, you don't have to repeat your login. We handle that for you. We know that can be a bit of a pain point if maybe you'd be using PowerShell and using different modules that are tied to each service. We've also got different ways of authenticating as well. So we support all different types of authentication. I'm going to show you device code, which is a really easy way to get started when I start demonstrating. One thing to call out with the CLI as well is, whilst we do provide these commands to manage your tenant, we've also got some, let's say, utility commands as well. So we know that if you're a SharePoint Framework developer, you might be using SharePoint Framework. If the project that you're working on potentially is using an old version of SharePoint Framework and a new version comes out, we actually provide guidance. We have an upgrade command that allows you to build a report that will say, run these commands, install these packages to get your project to the latest version. So we also provide those tools as well. So if you want to get started, you must have Node installed on your machine. This is generally installed in a lot of places now. It's very well used. But as long as you've got Node version 8 installed, you can simply install the package onto your machine. So we release every month. There's always a new version of the CLI every month, and what we do is we have updates weekly for new features that are released. So in any given week, we can have 3 or 4 different versions that you can try out with new features as well before committing and then going to the monthly release. And we've also got a Docker container as well, which is a really cool way of using the CLI, which I can briefly show you. We've got documentation, so check out the CLI for Microsoft 365 documentation. It's going to cover a lot of things which I'm going to go through today. We've got some guidance in here. We've got user guides, we've got the reference for the commands that you can use, and also we've got some sample scripts as well. So if you're wanting to go, I don't know what to use CLI for, we have people in the community who have submitted different examples, so you can see some of the scripts that they've created as well. So things like adding site collection admins into SharePoint. You've got some examples there that allow you to really test that out. So definitely check out the documentation, and you'll be able to see all the many different use cases apart from the one that I'll show you today. We are on GitHub, so this is open source. This is a community built tool. This is not a Microsoft built tool, although I do work for Microsoft. It's very much community. We've got lots of really great contributors who are regularly contributing new features to the CLI, hence why we release so many times a week and regular on a monthly basis, due to the great commitment that we've got from contributors who really like building the tool as well as using the tool. So if you are a developer and you're wanting to get involved in open source, we absolutely encourage people to get involved. We've got lots of different issues that you can pick up. Go check out the Good First Issue label and see if there's anything you want to work on. Because it's built on Node.js, if you know JavaScript, if you know TypeScript, you can get started really easily, and we've got lots of documentation to help get you started on that as well. And check us out on Twitter as well. So we've got a Twitter account. We generally do a lot of our announcements and updates through our Twitter account. So this is a really great place to be able to see what's going on with the CLI and reach out to us as well. So I said there was going to be a demo, so let's quickly get to the command line. We need to install the CLI, so I'm starting from scratch here. So what you can do is you can use the npm install, command 365, and we're going to install that globally. So I'm just going to run through, and it's going to install all of the dependencies on the machine. There we go. It's a pretty quick install, and we can just verify that that has been installed by running M365. And there we go. We've got the CLI on our machine, and here we've got the different commands that are available to us. We've got lots of groupings of all the different services that I've talked about. So Azure Active Directory, Flow, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, and so on. One of the things that you first need to do, so we need to connect to our environment for us to actually interact with. So we can just use the M365 login command, and this is going to use what's the device code login process. So I hit M365 login, it gives us a code. And I can then go to a device login page, which I'm going to do in here. So this is a browser where I'm already logged into a tenant. And I'm going to hit next. And I'm going to log in. And it's going to ask me to consent. So to help you get set up quite easily, we provide an identity in Azure that you can consent to. And you can see that there's lots of different permissions that we ask for, and there's quite a lot, and it can be a little bit scary, but it's there to really, you know, make sure you've got all the permissions consented to. So if you want to run a command, that the commands are going to work. We do have documentation that you can provide your own identity, and you can configure the CLI to use your own registration with the permissions kind of tailored to your requirements. But as a starting point, if you're working in a dev tenant, like I am doing at the moment, you can just, you know, view the different permissions that we're after and then hit accept. And what that does, that sets up the CLI for authenticating to your tenant. So if I go back to my command line, I can now just run M365 status, and it can show me now I'm actually connected to the tenant, and I can run different commands against it. So one of the commands that I can run at the moment, and I'll just show you how kind of simple this is. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the root SharePoint site. By calling M365 SPO site get, and then passing in the URL, it's going to go away to 365 into SharePoint, and then basically return me the data in JSON format. So there we have, we've returned that. We've got a nice JSON output, which then we could use to use that in our scripts. I'm just going to switch. So I did say that this was multi-platform. You know, I'm in Bash at the moment, but I can also use PowerShell. So I'm just going to switch to PowerShell, and I'm going to run the same command. And we'll just show that this still works. So we've already authenticated, so we can go cross. We can go from Bash, and we can go into PowerShell, and we can mix and match. But what's quite nice is then you can actually make use of those PowerShell commandlets. So that output that we've got in JSON, you could pass into. I forget the command, but I think there's a convert to JSON commandlet, which then will take that JSON and create a PowerShell object from that, and then you can start to use your PowerShell commands and kind of, you know, really start to build your scripting. PowerShell is great. I absolutely do love it for scripting, and it's nice to have that ability to use you know, both sides and both shells. One of the things that we do add in, so we have a query language, which is called JamesPath. What this allows us to do is to actually run queries as well. So when you have a response like a list, this example is basically going to go and get all of the sites that are in SharePoint sites that are in my tenant, and it's only going to return the sites that are connected to an Office 365 group. So these might be Microsoft Teams sites that have been created. And rather than return absolutely everything, we're going to tailor it to say, I only want the title and I only want the URL to be returned. So I can execute this, and you can see that I've actually got a more tailored list. So I've got the ability to amend the format of the data that's coming back as well. So James Path is something that's also used in the Azure CLI as well. So where we can, we know people that are using other CLIs like Azure CLI, where we have some kind of common features, and this query option is very much similar. I'll just quickly show you that we've got different types of outputs. So we default to output everything in JSON, but we do have like a text output as well. It just gives a slightly different view of that data. We are adding more of these types, so things like adding tables and even Markdown as well. So we can have simple reports being built from just executing the commands, but you're going to be using either text or JSON. I would suspect if when you're kind of getting into using the CLI and getting used to how it works. So you made the example earlier, Kazeem, about why would I use the Azure portal? Why would I use the CLI against the Azure portal?
Yes.
And I've got an example here that I can show. So I've been into the Microsoft documentation, and I'm wanting to use the Postman tool with the Microsoft Graph API. So the Graph team, they provide collections, so predefined queries that I can run against my tenant. But I've got to do some setup to make sure that I've got an identity in my tenant that the Postman tool can use to authenticate my requests. And looking through, I've come to step 3, creating an Azure AD application, and we can see, yes, I could go to the portal here, but I've got 19 steps that I have, in fact more, 20 steps that I've got to go through, and I've got to go backwards and forwards and click around, and we don't want to do that. That's just inefficient. So instead, we're going to use the CLI. Oop, wrong way. So I've just pasted in a example here, and I'm going to call out some elements. So this is a single command that's going to perform those 20 steps for me. So we can pass in a name. It's going to create an Azure AD app registration with the name of Postman. It uses the web platform. We set up the redirect URIs as well. We also say we want to have permission scopes set up with that registration as well. So we want to be able to read mail, and we also want to read details about all users. And we also want to generate a client secret as well. So when we go back to Postman, we can put those details in to Postman, and we can just work execute the requests. So we've now got those 20 lines down into one line, and I don't have to do any clicking. I just have to hit return, of which that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to hit return, and that's now running away, and bingo, we have an app registration that has been created. It's given us the output as well that we need, so information that is going to be useful to take us forward and configure either Postman in this instance. But let's say you've got a web application that you're going to be working with, and you're building a web application in Azure. You're going to need this information, so we just output that for you to make it easy. And just so that I can confirm that that has actually worked, I'm going to go into my Active Directory here, and I'm going to go to app registrations, and we can see that we should have the registration called Postman. We can see all the details have been set up. We can do the API permissions, and we can see that that's all being configured. Now I can just go and use it. And from the documentation standpoint, if we go back, I can now just pass in my details into the Postman client, and I'm good. So I've speeded that process up. So it's useful in this scenario, really useful if you're a developer developing against Microsoft 365 as well, because if you're using, say, Node.js, you can just install CLI as a package, run that command, and you're good to go.
But I want to ask quickly before we close out, for some people looking to dig a little bit deeper now, where do you think they can find resources that they can work with? Where would you want to point them to?
So definitely check out our GitHub repository. So if you go onto GitHub and search for CLI Microsoft 365, you'll get to our GitHub repository. We've got links there to all the different resources, to the website, to the Twitter account. Definitely follow us on Twitter. You'll definitely see what we're up to. And we regularly share some of the samples that I talked about as well. So check out the samples as well. If there's anything that you're maybe thinking, oh, how does this work? And I've got this scenario, can the CLI help? Maybe take a look at those samples, because we might already have something there. But yeah, just check out the repository, and you'll get to everything else as well.
Okay. Thank you very much once again, Garry. So you've heard it from Garry, the CLI guy himself. So, so I hope you've been able to learn some CLI for Microsoft 365 today from Garry on today's episode of the Tech Talk. So this is how much we've got for you on today's episode of the Tech Talk. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, it's Tech Talk with Kazeem. So please subscribe, and if you like this video as well, give it a thumbs up. So from myself and Garry now, it's a bye-bye, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Thank you very much, Garry.
Thank you, Kazeem. Thank you all. Bye-bye.